Helo a chroeso I tyfu ffydd, dod â gobaith a dangos cariad y cwrs.
Welcome to Grow Faith, Bring Hope and Demonstrate Love, the course. I'm Ben.
A Catrin ydw I.
And it's our privilege to be guiding you through these next sessions. Now today we're going to be sharing our own stories of faith and discussing the churches in which we worship.
Ond yn gyntaf, dyma Esgob Gregory yn esbonio pam fod storïau yn peth mor bwysig yn ein bywydau a'n ffydd.
Over to Bishop Gregory to explain to us why stories are so important to our life and faith.
A short reading from the letter to the Hebrews. With this great cloud of witnesses around us, we too must throw off every encumbrance and the sin that all too readily restricts us. And we should run with resolution the race which lies ahead of us, our eyes fixed upon Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the sake of the joy that lay ahead of him, he endured the cross, ignoring its disgrace, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Some years ago I was a school chaplain, and when I was a school chaplain it was one of my jobs to persuade various members of staff to speak to the whole school at the chapel services at the beginning of the day. Staff, who are used to teaching children after all, found this incredibly difficult. I always remember that the head of games eluded my requests until one day I pinned him down. He'd been a national rugby player, and yet when he stood up in front of 400 children at the school assembly, he was shaking like a leaf. Why? Because he had to talk about his faith. And talking about our faith is really a very difficult thing to do. Jesus tells a parable where he talks about the pearl of great price, which is the kingdom of heaven. But on this occasion, it was as if the head of games was having to put his hand into his heart and bring out the pearl of great price, which was his faith. Yet the truth is that we should all have a story to tell. In the passage that I've just read to you, the writer refers to Jesus as the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith, the one who begins the journey of faith in us and the one who will bring it to completion. So what is the story of faith in your life? How has Jesus been present to you? We all have a story to tell, the way in which God may have blessed us or challenged us or inspired us. What story do we tell when we speak of God? You know, Christianity only makes sense if it affects our lives, if the love of God is allowed to touch us and to change us. And everyone who is a follower of Jesus should have some such story, recent or maybe in the past, big or maybe small, that moment when we know God has touched our lives. It might be difficult to talk about the big things, but to start with stories and our own stories and journeys of faith is a very good place to begin.
Felly, dechrau gyda storïau, meddai Esgob Gregory.
Begin with stories, says Bishop Gregory, and what a great place to start. But I wonder, what story would you tell about your own journey of faith? We should never underestimate the power of story, because Jesus certainly didn't. Everyone has a different story to tell, and there'll be a chance for you to share your story in just a moment.
Ond er mwyn ein ysbrydoli, gofynnwn ni Linda a Keith Roberts sy'n addoli yn Eglwys St Peder yn Tryffynon i ddweud eu stori nhw iddyn ni.
But first over to Linda and Keith at St Peter's Church in Holywell to tell us something of their story of faith.
I'm Linda Roberts. I'm 73 years old. And we have 3 children and 11 grandchildren.
And I'm Keith. I'm Linda's husband of many years.
I went to Sunday school and I was christened in Church of England, but from then on, nothing. Maybe my granny spoke to me about Jesus, but from then on, nothing really. My dad had died and my mum had a friend who was a lovely man, and he died suddenly. And my mum went off the rails a bit, and me and my sister were sad about all that. And then there was a man next door but one, for all our time we lived there, that used to ask us to come to church, and we all used to hide from him. So one day he got my mother and in a good frame, and she went to church, and that was it. Mum completely changed, and me and my sister were very happy because she but then she asked us to come to her baptism, and we thought, oh my goodness. My sister and I went to really laugh at her, really, because you couldn't put water over my mum's head to wash her hair. She was so terrified. She couldn't swim. We went to the church and we cried the whole day, basically. And I didn't know why I was crying. My sister was one side of the room, I was the other. And I remember a man saying, if anybody wants to know Jesus, put your hand up. I couldn't stop my hand from going up. And when I looked over, my sister's hand was up as well. And I just can't explain. From that day on, I knew there was something different in me. My work colleagues thought I'd gone mad. My husband thought I'd gone mad. But it was wonderful. It was just fun, and still is. I was happy. I was content. And I had somebody that never changes and loves me for all the bad stuff that I've done, for all the bad stuff I think, for everything. He forgave me. That in itself, goodness me, how can anybody say no to that? Now that I'm learning lots more and reading lots more, I realise that God had me from the beginning, you know, but I just didn't come then.
My story's completely different. Mainly my family were Methodists from Cley and around there. I was brought up in Derbyshire with my father. There was a school teacher in the village, and she used to knock every Sunday and drag me off to chapel for Sunday school. So I would be steeped in, I don't want to call it religion, but I was steeped in the belief from an early time. That stayed with me all the way through, but I don't consider that a time when I was a Christian. Good foundation, the principles and morals and everything stayed with me all the way through. But then in midlife, I joined the Navy, and I've always been a practical guy, and one of the lads played rugby, you know, all of this. And so when this happened to my wife, I had to take a step back, because I was running along on a level playing field, neither pro nor negative. And then this happened to Linda, and I was sceptical.
So
and it
amazing.
took some time for me to think,
Yeah. Only a year, darling.
what's going on here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Only, yeah.
Once I'd submitted and received the Holy Spirit, the transformation is unbelievable.
We knew a Welshman, a good Ivor Hopkins, and he was our minister. He baptised me and you, didn't he? And his words come back to me nearly every day. You cannot be bed and breakfast with the Lord. You've got to be full board. And that's it, in a nutshell, isn't it?
Yeah, you missed off the my dear on the...
My dear. Oh yes, my dear.
Full board or bed and breakfast, what a really helpful illustration and challenge for us to take away with us. And what a wonderful example from Linda and Keith of the power of story.
Felly beth yw eich profiad chi o Duw? Efallai nad ydych chi'n cytuno gyda popeth dywedodd Linda a Keith, ac mae hynny'n iawn. Fel dywedodd yn flaenorol, mae gan bawb stori wahanol i'w rannu.
So what's your experience with God? The beauty of story is the diversity that we find in them. We don't necessarily have to agree, but we can still be inspired by what we hear. So what's your story? Where has your faith journey led you? How did you become a Christian? Who are the people who have helped you, and what difference have they made in your life of faith? This is the point at which you can pause the film now and take 15 minutes to tell your stories. And there's some questions to help you along the way. Have a great discussion, and we'll see you in a moment. Welcome back. I really hope that discussion has been helpful and you've been inspired hearing one another's stories. Catrin and I have very different faith stories, and yet we are here together showing that diversity and yet unity that we find in our faith. My faith story was one of wrestling. I had been to Sunday school throughout my early years and had heard all the stories of God's goodness and God's love and his grace, and yet in the reality of life lived didn't seem to match up with the stories that I'd heard. And yet during a 24/7 prayer week in my church growing up, God spoke to me and just reminded me that he was with me, that he journeyed with me through the dark times and through the light, that God was always there. And in that moment, I just felt loved and accompanied, like I had a friend like I'd never experienced before. There have been many chapters added to my story since then, and I could probably give you several hours of storytelling, but we haven't got time for that now.
Felly wedi rhannu ein storïau, awn yn ôl at Linda a Keith wrth iddynt sôn i ni am ei eglwys nhw yn Rheffynon.
So let's go back to Linda and Keith, shall we, as they tell us about their church in Holywell.
We lived in Singapore with Keith's job for a bit, and we went to a church there, lovely church, and when we came home back to Holywell, to our home, we didn't know where to go. So I sent him off one day. I said, look, we need to fellowship somewhere. And he went down to St. James's to the board. And he said, oh, there's something on tonight down there at 6 o'clock. So we went down, and it was guitars and drums, and we thought, whoa, we found it. It was John Lomas then. And we went in and we had a lovely evening, didn't we? And on the way out, a lovely man, Bryn, that's still here with it, said, it's not like this every week, you know. But we knew, didn't we? I don't know why.
Yes, in our prayer life, God was saying, you need to join a local church.
Community.
You need to be part of the community.
That kept coming back, didn't it?
Kept coming back.
To both of us. We
And
need
that's
to
how
be.
we went down there looking for it.
Because we knew we were home for good then.
Yes.
And
my
you'd
travels had
retired.
stopped.
Yeah. It definitely is community.
Yes, it's strange that we're actually here in inverted commas traditional denominational church, the church in Wales, because our natural home, as we were going through our baptism in the Spirit and our community life and everything, it was all more very charismatically orientated. So if someone had said to me 10 years ago, you will end up in the church in Wales, I would have probably laughed at them.
Yeah.
And still to this day, I wouldn't say that I am enveloped in the structural religion that this is. However, there's a security in it, and I'm at peace here, and I don't think you can ask for anything more. I'm not troubled when I come here, my spirit isn't troubled, so I am at peace, and I think it's that peace, being in an environment which you would not naturally move towards.
Yeah, you knew more about the liturgy stuff. I didn't even know what a Eucharist was. Yeah. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But I didn't.
But it also here provides me with the practical Christianity side of me, with the garden and the bees and
the people that come,
and being the warden and the people that
dinner.
come.
We do Christmas dinner.
Yeah. So it feeds my practicality as well as my spiritual life.
You were away a little bit at the beginning, weren't you? And I went to St James's, and I remember one incident. I didn't know how to go up for communion or what to do, and we were in pews, obviously, down there. And Jen, that is here now, she said, "Do you want to go to communion?" And she led me up, and I loved that. I think we need to think about that now in our churches.
Yeah, the welcoming and the community side.
Yeah, because the one thing, the church where I came to know the Lord, when you, even now, after all these years, when you walk in those doors, there is love in abundance, absolute love. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
It is really.
I Linda a Keith, y profiad o'r croeso a'r cariad y teimlans oedd y ffactorau pwysig wrth dewis pa eglwys I fynychu.
So for Linda and Keith, it was the welcome that they experienced and the love that they felt that was so important when joining a church. But as well as spiritual nourishment, church provides practical opportunities to serve others, as they've also shared with us. So how would you describe your church? You can now pause the film again and take 15 minutes to discuss your church with one another. And here are some questions to help with your conversation.
Gobeithio'n eich bod wedi mwynhau y sesiwn yma, lle rydym wedi rhannu ein storïau personol am ein taith ffydd ac am y cymunedau lle rydym yn addoli.
We really do hope you've enjoyed this session. You've had rich discussion as you've shared stories about your individual faith journeys and also the communities of faith that you worship in. What has become apparent is the fact that our stories are all different, and that is a great thing to be celebrated. That there always may be some common threads. We are all God's gathered people. I suspect that many of us will have mentioned the importance of a person or a number of people who have encouraged us and shaped us on our journey. Sometimes because of what they have said, sometimes because of what they have done, often because of who they are and the way they live their Christian lives.
A mae hyn yn ein atgoffa ni o'n galwedigaeth I helpu, cefnogi ac annog eraill ar eu teithiau nhw. Adeiladwn ar y syniadau yma yn ein sesiynau I ddod wrth I ni cysidro ffydd a sut mae'n ffurfio ein bywydau.
And this reminds us, of course, of our own calling to help, to support and to nurture other people's journeys. We could be that significant person for somebody else in their story. We'll build on these ideas in our next session as we consider faith and how it shapes our lives. But for now, we're going to close our first session with prayer. Gweddion, let us pray together.